Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Watier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Watier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Doing fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We've been sitting on these two articles because it's just a perfect fit from where we've been talking about and what we've been talking about and where we're going with Fasting for Life in 2025. So excited to dive into the two articles today, both from the same lab in the same year back in 2022. So I love the perspective and the outcomes. So you are going to walk away from today's episode with actionable encouragement and insight into how a fasting lifestyle can be the once and for all solution for your weight loss, body composition, and ultimately long-term health goals. So with that being said, we're going to dive into intermittent fasting 1 day versus 2 days, match for total energy intake and expenditure, increases weight loss in overweight and obese men. And then we're going to talk about IF and protein pacing and how it's superior to caloric restriction for weight loss and visceral fat loss and hunger, and insert all these extra cool things that we're going to share with you today.
Yeah, like increasing fat-free mass as well.
Ooh, look at you, fancy words. So if you are new to the podcast, welcome in. We're going to nerd out a little bit, but as promised in the intro, we're going to give you some actionable things that you can do and put into your fasting journey in your day-to-day life starting right now. Hopefully y'all get that reference. If you're new, head back and listen to episode 1. If you want to know more about Tommy, more about myself, more about how fasting has transformed our lives, why we do what we do, why we have the challenges, the coaching, the resources, etc. If you're looking for more support, head to the show notes. We've got a whole host of different resources that can be helpful to you. A new persona quiz for your fasting lifestyle adaptation. We have the blueprint to fasting for fat loss, the upcoming challenge, etc. So if you're looking for more support, head there and take a peek. If you're a long-term listener, welcome in. You guys are going to be excited about this article and what we dive into today, Tommy. So with that, if I do say so myself, high energy, incredible introduction to today's conversation. Let's start with the article out of the Nutrition Journal. And this was early, so January of 2022, and it's intermittent fasting, 2 days versus 1 day per week. So I'll have you unpack what that is in just a second. They're matched for total energy intake and expenditure and increases the weight loss. The outcomes are it increases weight loss in overweight, obese men and women. So it is a smaller study. However, it's really cool how they were comparing the fasting 1 day versus 2 days, because these are things that we coach on and use inside of our challenges, inside of our coaching programs to help people lose weight. It was a short-term study over the course of 4 weeks, and it reinforced what we believe, which is one of the key components to long-term success, the protein pacing or body composition kind of conversation that we've been having a lot more frequently these days. Since we have a lot more folks reaching those weight loss goals and now figuring out how to maintain them, which is the ultimate begin with the end in mind strategy that we like to apply.
Yeah, and then ultimately be working on body composition. What is my fat-free mass look like versus my visceral adiposity? And, just trying to optimize that, because we know that these things are highly correlated with long-term health outcomes and health span, as we like to talk about. So when we look at I guess I'll start with a question that we oftentimes get, which is how often do I need to be fasting, or something even more
AKA,
specific?
What's the best fasting schedule?
Sure. Yeah. It's very, very, very common question. And one that's, it's a very loaded question, and it's very individualized and, unique to you and your goals and your experience level and all these other factors. So when we just take the question at the surface, which is how often should I be fasting at all, then, I'm always going to say, I think some level of fasting is appropriate for every single day because it supports and reinforces a lifestyle adaptation that can go with you regardless of what your body composition goals are. And of course, most of us find fasting for fat loss, but at the same time, if it's working and if it's effective, then eventually I'm going to find other goals that aren't just fat loss related. And so what I really want to know is, can I adapt fasting to kind of fit those goals too? And so when we get into this question or this research methodology, which is 1 day of fasting versus 2 days of fasting per week, we're essentially kind of talking about like 5-2 fasting, or almost like 1-6 fasting, where it's I'm doing something for most of the week, and there is a complete burning fat day or two, or a modified burning fat day or two during the week. And so this was a cool way to set it up, because essentially looking at how many calories you're taking in like a maintenance level of calories, not a deliberate caloric deficit on most days, but then putting in a good fasting either 1 day or 2 days a week. So in this study, that was essentially a 36-hour-ish fast once per week, or close to a 60-hour fast once per week. Now, in this study in particular, which is the case for a lot of studies like this, it was actually a modified fast day, which means about 400 to 500 calories on the quote unquote fasting day. So it's not a full complete burn day, but it is a modified, which is easier to get research compliance with, but not quite as effective as a full clean fast, right?
Oh no. I had a sausage and an egg off of my kid's plate on my fasting day. What am I to do?
Right.
Keep fasting.
Yeah.
It's okay. I must only drink water. That's fine. Yeah. If you want to live the clean fasting lifestyle, yes, that is the biggest bang for your buck in terms of adopting fasting for autophagy and stem cell and gut health. And yes, but if life's gonna life and you do mess up occasionally, guess what? You're still gonna get results. Consistency wins time and time again. So yeah. Would we have designed, hey, yeah, they want compliance in these studies. They want to know. And I think only one person dropped off in this study, right?
Yeah, it was like 1 out of 20. It was like 95% compliance on the fasting group. So it was cool over 4 weeks.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, and then the second study actually uses the data from this and then compares it to caloric restriction. So we'll get there. So that was the first thing I heard was, oh, it's okay to like not be perfect.
Right.
Like it's okay. Yeah. Right now, clean fasting. Yes, we're all for it. Having a sparkly water or an element or something that keeps you consistent day after day, week after week. Yes, that is always going to win. The second thing I heard there, Tommy, is that it was interesting. They actually said that in the background of the study, they said that full activation of benefits typically requires at least 24 hours of fasting.
Yeah, I think that's a great point too.
And quality of calories consumed during fasting and feasting is often overlooked.
Yes. That is the one of the big takeaways from this study.
Yes.
I love that they highlighted that, because so many that we're looking at, they're like, and just people new to fasting, it's kind of like, I came to fasting so I didn't have to worry about those food choices, but you're leaving so much benefit on the table, literally.
Yep. So the 36-hour fast, right? Typically we see that from if you did a breakfast, right, to the following day dinner. Or if you just had a normal day of eating, you stopped eating whenever you eat dinner, and then you had an entire day the next day of fat burning. Now, in this study, it was that little mini meal, the modified ADF, 400, 500 calorie protein paste snacksident, right? Mini meal. And then you didn't eat a main meal that day. You only had that one thing. And then you continued burning until the following morning when you would have breakfast again, right?
Yeah. Yep.
And for the 60 hours of fasting, it was back-to-back days. So you'd have a day of eating, right? You'd stop, you'd go fast day with a little, mini meal snacks in it. That's what they were here in the study. That's what they did. Results are incredible. And then you would go back to a normal day of eating. So we get this question a lot, like, well, I'm doing 18-6 or I'm doing 16-8 and it worked for a while, but now it's stopped working. Or I have insulin resistance or weight loss resistance and I've been on the diet roller coaster. I've gained and lost 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 pounds, right? And now I'm stuck. Like it's not working anymore. Okay, well, we agree with this, that you need to have that extended fast. Well, what defines an extended fast? Well, again, we can draw a line in the sand at multiple different points or multiple different hours along that timeline.
Sure.
But this is clear, right? That like we've said this, and Dr. Fung says this too. It's in one of his books, is that 30 to 36 hour mark is incredibly powerful for that insulin sensitivity increase, which is the opposite of the insulin resistance, right? So they talk about the increased fatty acid oxidation and metabolic switching that takes place in this study. So it's cool because it's like, all right, well, maybe you're not as consistent. Maybe you're doing, to your point, Tommy, some form of time restricted eating, some form of 16, 18, 20 hour fast throughout the week. And you're like, I'm just having trouble staying consistent. Well, bang out a 36 or bang out a back-to-back. And we're going to share with you the results here. And you don't have to do it every week, but a couple times a month, like you're going to be getting all of those other benefits of consistency. And then you're going to be ramping up those results by doing this. So they did this for 4 weeks. So they did a 36 or a 60 over the course of 4 weeks. And the results we're going to share with you are just absolutely like astounding. It's incredible. When we look at the macro breakdown, Tommy, this was really cool. 2 things here stuck out to me is we typically say protein doesn't happen by accident, protein first, right?
Correct. Yeah.
So the macronutrients were what?
35% protein, 35% carbohydrate, 30% fat. So basically an almost even distribution across the board. Now we talk about 40, 40, 20, 40% protein, 40% fat, 20% carbohydrates, kind of being that metabolic sweet spot. But, starting with protein and basically getting that right, putting that in the 35% range, that's huge. Metabolically, that's really, really difficult, almost impossible for the body to screw up protein. And when you start there, it's like, things start to fall into place, much more intuitively in each meal.
So most studies that we've seen typically follow, unless it's a low carb study, typically follow a lot of time restricted eating studies, ADF studies, follow the standard American diet, right? 50 to 55% carbohydrate. Yeah. 15, 20% protein, right?
Well, if you're lucky, yeah.
So this was like, woohoo, like that's what I'm talking about. So there were 2 groups. There were the IFP1 group and the IFP2 group. The one group was the 36-hour fast. The IFP2 group was the 60-hour fast, the 2 days, right? Per week, back-to-back days. So the protein thing here definitely stood out to me. And the second thing that stood out to me with this macro breakdown was the ability to say okay to non-refined, non-processed carbohydrates. Because it's 35%. So many people are low carb, keto. We've talked about this ad nauseum. We definitely recommend low carb and keto in 90-day increments for therapeutic things, for plateau breaking, for hormone balancing, for diabetes reversal. Yes. But the long-term data clearly shows that keto and very low carb diets don't result in good body composition and weight loss results long-term. So I'm not going to go Dr. Perlmutter, grain brain, sweet potatoes, the devil. No, like you need that stuff, especially as a female with a cycle. You need that for progesterone. That's carbohydrates build, progesterone and healthy hormone levels. So I love the fact that these results were with a 35% carbohydrate number, which gives you some, again, flexibility for life and long-term happiness and sustainability. Now, ultra processed, refined, sugars, all that crap. If you've been listening long enough, we know that that's like one of the things we're dogmatic about. Like, get rid of the obesogenic food environment. Like, that's a real thing to us. Yeah. But this gives you some flexibility if you're still tracking and looking at macros, right? To have long-term success. So I just love the fact, and the other thing was that isogenics was where a lot of the meals or the liquid meal replacement shakes were provided. If they didn't want to follow the actual breakfast, lunch, dinner, protein, carb, fat meal recommendations, right? Because they gave them the same groups, the same meal recommendations: protein, veggie, fiber, etc., carbohydrates. But you can also like get away with, I've been doing this recently, is adding a 42 gram protein shake to my coffee.
Oh, okay.
I'm not fasting during that time, right? It's my morning window, my late morning coffee ingestion, plus my main lunch meal, which is my typical go-to these days. Okay. But I'm able to increase. And so this was isogenics, love it or hate it, take it or leave it, right? What do you do when you stop buying the shakes? You probably stop getting the results. But it's okay. Like, you have permission to make this work for you. Which is one of the things that I loved about it. And then when we're looking at some of the markers, Tommy, the compliance, very high compliance rates.
Yeah.
Body composition assessment. So body weight, height, waist circumference, BMI, take it or leave it with the BMI. Cardiovascular, blood pressure and heart rate were measured. Fasted blood samples, insulin, ghrelin, and glucagon-like polypeptide 1, so GLP-1. That's a big thing these days, right? With the Ozempics of the world.
Yeah.
The visual
This would be the natural pathways, right? They get activated, which is awesome.
Then they looked at hunger and satiety at baseline in week 5 as well.
Yes, which I thought was really cool because, fullness factors actually went up on the IFP1 group, but actually went down in the IFP2 group. But this wasn't necessarily a bad thing, because when we think of fullness, not necessarily satiety, but like how full do you actually feel? And so it's not necessarily a bad thing for that to come down. What was really cool though was that hunger just barely changed in the IFP1 group with one fasting day, but it went down substantially, almost cut in half in the IFP2
So you're
group.
saying I feel better after I eat, and I'm not as hungry as I thought I would be on the 2-day fasting plan?
Yeah. That's where the surprise comes from, right?
Shocking.
Yeah. No, but it feels shocking when you first go through it, right? You're like, what the heck? I thought I was going to be much hungrier than that, which is really cool, because that can almost be a self-limiting belief that keeps you from trying it. Which is why we thought that was really cool. And it also makes a lot of sense when you go look at the ghrelin numbers, because ghrelin actually came down substantially, almost, getting close to the 10% mark in the IFP2 group with the 2 burning days. Whereas in the IFP1 group, it actually went up. And remember that ghrelin is the growling hunger hormone, right?
Hungry.
Yeah. So those feelings of hunger versus satiety like make a lot of sense, because you have some good physiological data here with what's happening between the two groups, and that GLP actually, the GLP-1 actually substantially increasing within the IFP1 group was also really cool to see too.
Just by fasting. Sure. So weight loss and body composition, IFP1, IFP2, both had great reductions. I'm going to talk about calories in a second too. I just don't want to forget. We didn't prep that ahead of time, and I want to just make sure I make comment on it, because that's going to allow us to transition to the second article, which is from the same lab, same authors, 6 months later, where they took the IFP1, IFP2, and then compared it to caloric restriction. So average of 4.7 kilograms or 5.2% in the IFP1 group after 4 weeks.
Wow.
The IFP2 group lost 7% or 7.1 kilograms. So what is that? 14 plus pounds?
Yeah.
Right?
That's
in
awesome.
The IFP2 group, I'm terrible at math and conversions, like 2 point something.
2.2.
2.2. Yeah. See, I should know that. Waist circumference decreased 4.8% IFP1 and 8% in IFP2.
Wow. And that's visceral adiposity right there.
Episode article 2. Hold on. Hold on. I want to go there in a second.
Yeah, that's cool.
Both significant reductions in total body fat percentage, fat mass, and increases in fat-free mass, with fat-free mass increasing by 2% of both across both groups in a month.
Increased fat-free mass.
in a month.
That's great.
And they maintained similar total energy between the groups and energy expenditure. So this was a really well-designed study.
Oh, and small decrease in blood pressure markers also.
Yep, the secondary cardiovascular markers. Exactly. So short term, you wouldn't expect to see like a triglyceride HDL ratio kind of change or cholesterol markers kind of change. It was at 8 weeks, yes. At 4 weeks, probably not. But it was cool to see the cardiovascular markers did change.
Things were moving in the right direction.
Yeah.
Even like triglycerides going from somewhere around 100 in the IFP2 group down to 77 in that IFP2 group just over a few weeks. Very, very cool. And some small changes in total cholesterol and LDLs as well.
Yep. Lower hunger ratings in IFP2. Intermittent fasting, I mean, it is not anecdotal anymore. This is a real thing. Once you break through the 24-hour mark, you wake up and you're like, whoa, this is different, right?
Yeah.
So encouraging to all of you, hopefully, to be able to push past that one meal a day, I got to eat today kind of mindset. It is doable. The more you do it, the more metabolic switching you get is really, really, really powerful. And that's that fatty acid oxidation, the ketone body formation, the activation of like those insulin sensitivity pathways, reducing inflammation, promoting autophagy. That 24-hour mark is pretty clear in this study that's where those benefits come in. Yeah,
a good way to think about that is that you haven't activated those pathways before this, so you're kind of like dusting off these pathways, and it takes a few weeks, to kind of get those kicking and increase the efficiency of DNA replication, so you can get those enzymes going.
But they talk about quality of nutrients, some nutrients dense foods, vitamins, minerals, high quality protein. I mean, these are all things that we just align with. So the excitement was real on this one. The one thing I did want to mention as we transition into the second article, Tommy, and the second article, again, 6 months later, same year, 2022, this was intermittent fasting and protein pacing are superior to caloric restriction for weight and visceral fat loss. So we always talk about insulin resistance, visceral adiposity, waist to height, waist ratio, and waist circumference and waist height ratio. My goodness, in terms of long-term decreased risk of all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, etc. But I did want to mention that based on the fact that these groups were overweight and obese individuals, right? In that first IFP1, IFP2 study, they were in a caloric restriction. So people are going to say, well, the caloric calorie in, calorie out model, well, it was just because they decreased their calories. I'm like, okay, sure. Explain the additional benefits that we saw, right? In terms of hunger, et cetera. So what I love is that they took the results from the IFP study and compared it to a heart-healthy calorie restriction diet on health outcomes. The hypothesis posits that IFP will enhance health and body composition more than caloric restriction. Well, it did, and it's really freaking cool.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at the hunger factors, when we look at the satiety factors.
So hold on, when you look at I want you to go here, but this is a huge thing for compliance and sustainability. Who's done a diet and they're chronically freaking starving all the time?
That's all you can think about.
Now, some of the good nutrition coaches and physiology-based folks out there will say, okay, yeah, if you're in a calorie restriction, yeah, you're going to have to, I can teach you ways to mitigate that hunger.
Sure.
But especially in the beginning, it's really hard. And that's one of the hardest things that we hear from a compliance standpoint long-term.
Well, one of the first levers that they would pull to control some of that hunger would be to reduce carbohydrates.
Yep.
Because proteins and fats don't create the same leptin ghrelin imbalances and the same memory, the same dopamine heavy memory of recent food intake.
How do you say it? You say a low calorie, high insulin or high volatile blood sugar state, right?
Yeah. Low calorie, high insulin becomes a very volatile environment, and volatile,
gravy, snacky, grazy.
Correct. Yeah. Because you feel like you need to kind of jump in with those swings, those large blood sugar and insulin swings, and you're kind of chasing after them so that you're not feeling the dip so much. And that's really problematic. And then so when we go here, thinking about the biggest lever to pull for those cravings, a lot of times from a nutritionist standpoint, would be carbohydrates and carbohydrate reduction. But to see, again, this study based around 35% carbohydrate intake, which is...
And 35% protein.
Yeah. So balanced macronutrients, which also is not going to happen directly by accident, but is very easy to kind of shift over some of your plate towards more protein and less carbohydrates, but not restrictively less. That's still like anything that you were going to have on your plate, you could just adjust the portion size accordingly. And then you could easily fit into that protocol. So it's very realistic, it's very doable, and it's very sustainable, which I really like. And to see that paired up with a substantially decreased desire to eat within the intermittent fasting and protein pacing group, they had a 17% reduction in just those hunger thoughts and just feeling like I
food
need
noise.
to eat. Yeah, food noise. Thank you. Versus a plus 1% in the caloric restriction group, where it's like, well, they're basically the same as they were before. But to get a reduction of that while you're experiencing the benefits here that we're talking about, why wouldn't you do that?
Right?
You can't make an argument that makes sense for why you would choose the caloric restriction over the intermittent fasting with protein pacing.
I want to be hungry and miserable all the time.
And get less results.
17% less of that going this other route. So this is like, hey, diabetic, would you like to go on medication and manage your diabetes for the rest of your life and be, having to do that? Or would you like to reverse it? Duh. Like, let's take the reverse, right? Let's take that path. So do you want to get some good changes? And we'll talk about the results here in just a second from fat mass perspective, body composition perspective. Do you want to get those results doing it the hard way? Or do you want to go over here and do it the easier way?
Yeah.
And we're not talking about this massive amount of fasting.
Yeah.
Right? With the IFP study. We're not talking about this like overwhelming, man, I got to do a 36 3 times a week. I got to do rolling 72s. I got to do, holy crap, 1911.
I got to be hardcore. I got to be a
1911 fasting cure, right?
Yeah.
Upton Sinclair. No sane man or woman would do 2 to 3 day fasts over and over and over and over again. We don't want that.
That's a good point. It's a good point.
Right? So it's just crazy to me. So here's the reality is significant weight loss, IFP versus caloric restriction. So this was an 8-week study. And at the 5-week mark, the IFP groups followed the same dietary recommendations compared to the caloric restriction group, right? So 9% weight loss in the IFP group versus 5%, so almost double in the CR group in 8 weeks. Okay, great. Scale's the scale. Okay.
Yeah.
Let's just table that. 16% reduction in total fat mass and a 33% reduction in visceral fat.
Wow.
So, well, what did the calorie restriction group get? Great question. 9%, so less than half compared to the 16% in total fat mass, and 14% reduction in visceral fat, which is great. 9 and 14, anyone would take that.
Sure.
If you're hungry all the time and you're, doing the let me eat every couple of hours, high insulin stimulating, low calorie, hungry all the time world. So 1633 versus 914.
And never really get like a full meal, like that full satiety.
Yeah, these little meals.
Yeah. A little like, oh man, I almost just ate. Ooh, that was almost kind of nice, but not quite.
Right.
And then even when you add up their actual caloric intake, it was interesting too, because the IFP group had almost 9,500 calories per week. Okay. The intermittent fasting protein pacing was about 9,500 calories per week. The caloric restriction group was actually just under 9,100. The caloric restriction group had less calories that they brought in every single week.
Well, you just wanted to hide that little nugget in our show prep?
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Right.
Wow. Wait. So that's incredible. I don't think I've ever seen that in a study before.
Yeah. Yeah. So they went across the week, and the intermittent fasting protein pacing took in literally 5% fewer or 5% more calories, excuse me, over the week. And then physical activity, energy expenditure, like exercise, physical activity was actually a little bit higher, was about 15% higher in the caloric restriction group. For whatever reason, they weren't prescribed this. These are just how the numbers worked out.
So 5% more calories, and what percent more caloric burn?
About 15% less exercise induced caloric burn from the intermittent fasting protein pacing group.
Wow. So less movement and more calories. So the opposite of eat less, move more.
Correct. Yeah.
Holy moly.
Eat more, move a little bit less. Yeah.
You buried the lead on that. Yeah, it's not like, oh my gosh, it's 30% difference, right? But it's still really freaking cool to see.
It still goes against the oversimplified thermodynamics argument, which
calorie
would be calorie is a calorie is a calorie, you know?
Yep.
And then,
go.
I was just looking at the increased fat-free mass too, which was double in the intermittent fasting protein pacing group. So it's just the skeletal muscle protecting effects of the fasting that they were doing, along with the deliberate protein pacing. So it was, what food are they bringing in, and how are they actually spacing their meals in between, and what is their insulin response between those meals and to the meals themselves, determines what's actually going on. It wasn't because they were prescribed more exercise or anything else like that, but they just got better results. That's just how it works out. Calories
matter, hormones matter, insulin matter. It all matters. It's all part of it.
Yeah.
Right? We talk about this an entire day dedicated to this during our challenges, day 5 on Sundays. Like this is what we talk about when it comes to how tracking calories, counting calories, tracking macros, hijacked hormones, and emotional relationship with food. The hunger cues, right?
Yep.
The BS. Hungry, angry, lonely, tired, bored, or stressed. Why? What am I going to do? I'm going to go to food for my dopamine, my serotonin, my happy hormones, right? So increased fat-free mass, twice as much reduction in total fat mass and visceral fat.
Yeah.
17% reduction in desire to eat, 1% increase in the calorie restriction group over the 8-week study. Both dietary approaches led to improvements in blood pressure and lipid profiles, but they were more pronounced in the IFP group, right? So additional benefits for cardiovascular health. Similar totally, like you already went over the energy intake versus physical activity component. I just had a conversation with a friend last week who went to his doc and got some blood work back, and there were elevated triglycerides, great triglyceride to HDL ratio, better than mine, right?
Wow.
I'm like, all right, well, that's cool. Elevated total, elevated LDL. However, great triglyceride to HDL ratio. The doctor, he's lost 90 pounds.
Wow.
Since early summer, late spring, early summer, I believe.
Wow.
And the doctor's response was, you need to stop fasting and doing carnivore because your body doesn't know the difference between cardiac muscle and skeletal muscle. And when you're glycogen depleted, it's going to use that as a fuel source.
Oh, wow.
Okay. So explain to me in this study then the increase in fat-free mass and decrease in visceral adiposity.
Yeah.
That's not physiologically possible. So it's counterculture to even it just doesn't make sense to me that level of reasoning or thought process, that's not what we see.
Right. That's not what any of the data shows.
Opposite.
Yeah.
So the reality is okay, we've talked about the IFP1, IFP2, right? So now we've got IF, protein pacing, more effective than calorie restriction for weight loss, improving body composition, cardiometabolic health, increase in fat-free mass, decrease in visceral adiposity. We've got a huge disparity between the hunger, leptin and ghrelin relationship between the two different strategies. We talk about nutrient-dense foods. What we believe in is protein doesn't happen by accident, prioritizing that. And these findings have a significant public health implication, right? That we need to focus on the quality of the food and the timing of our food over just counting calories and moving more.
Even that quality of the food versus just the timing of it.
Right.
Because
it's one lever first.
Yeah. Yeah. But like, don't come to fasting and just throw away examining what you are eating when you go to break those fasts. That's why we call it a nutrition opportunity, not fast and feast, right? That verbiage has a subconscious undertone that leads to different sorts of behavior. But to quote the article here, which was a point that you mentioned at the beginning of our conversation, was the omission of like highly processed foods and the quality of the food, and considering the evidence supporting the efficacy of calorie restriction, which emphasizes the diet quality. So oftentimes the fasting protocols don't look at diet quality. And
a lot of the studies are the standard American.
Yeah, they don't pull that lever.
Right.
But here's the thing. In these two studies, they got very, very like amazing results. But they also didn't just throw away those other 4 to 5 days during the week when they weren't just burning through fat. They knew what they were bringing in, and they stuck to that 35% protein. They stuck to that 35% carbs and 30% fat. And so they knew approximately how many calories they were bringing in. And it's not to say that you necessarily need to track calories every single day, but just understanding, what does 35% of protein look like?
What does it look like on my plate?
What does it look like? And then getting in the habit of doing that while intaking a good number of calories, the right number of calories on those days that you weren't deliberately just fasting through, is like that was also part of the magic formula here for the results that they got.
Yep, absolutely. So we know obesity continues to be an absolute just increase in all-cause mortality and a burden to the healthcare system and a decrease in quality life. We know that lifestyle factors, diet and nutrition are the preferred interventions, not consistent medication use. We know that nutrient-dense foods are the place we need to go. We know that we believe that fasting is a solution for any and all. And it's really cool for this lab to have been able to do back-to-back studies looking at fasting versus fasting, right, with protein, and then taking that and going and putting that up against a calorie restriction regimen for cardiometabolic health, body composition, and satiation. So this might be one of my most favorite episodes that we've ever done.
Yeah.
So we're going to be referring back to this one. Things that we've seen anecdotally, things that we've wanted and pontificated on about, I'd rather see a study do this.
Right.
I'd rather see a study do that. Right. It is a smaller study with, N equals 20 in both groups.
Sure.
IFP1 and IFP2, and then IFP versus CR. But 4 weeks versus 8 weeks, 24-hour, a lot of the things that we've seen have now been validated again in what it is that we do. So if you guys are looking for support, head to the show notes, grab a resource, join a challenge, accelerate your results, stay true to the fasting lifestyle. Consistency always wins, Tommy. As we wrap up today, man, I appreciate the conversation as always, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.
So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.